Hi, my name is Rachel Simone Weil. I'm going to be talking about retro gaming and the pleasures of the obscure reference. Yes, okay. So as John mentioned, I'm a recent graduate of the UT's Master of Fine Arts program where I studied retro gaming. I describe myself as a weirdo indie dev, art game dev. And right now I'm in a few days, I'll be starting teaching at UT in Digital Foundations in the Department of Art and Art History. So I also help run some video game events around town, here and abroad. Juegos Rancheros and Fantastic Arcade are a few of the events here in Austin that I'll be helping organize. And in 2012, I founded Famicom Museum, which is a collection of 20th century video games and electronic toys that were designed for or marketed to girls. I found that those were really underrepresented in typical game archives. And finally, since about 2010, I've been programming experimental video games and animations for the original Nintendo NES console under the alias Party Time Excellent. So I unfortunately can't talk too much about the details of programming for the NES, but if anyone wants to come find me later, yes, it's all in assembly. I'd be happy to chat with you about that. So my main area of interest, of course, is in retro gaming, and that's what I want to talk about for the rest of my time. And I want to start with a little anecdote. So you guys might have seen these shirts before. It's the 4 Beatles names set in Helvetica, ampersands on a t-shirt, designed by Experimental Jet Set. And if you haven't seen this shirt, you may have seen one of the many, many parodies of this shirt, right? It became really popular sort of format, 4 names on a t-shirt set in Helvetica, ampersands. And I bring this up merely to say that everything is a copy, right? Nothing's original. And I love this quote from Steal Like an Artist. And not only is nothing original, but when we think something's original, 9 times out of 10, we just don't get the reference of the original source. And I think that's definitely really true. And I love thinking about references and the things that influence us as creatives. So I want to show you guys another t-shirt. So everyone laughed, great. We take pleasure in this shirt, right? Because we just saw the reference. We know what this is a reference to, and we know the names of these folks, right? Shigeru Miyamoto and Gunpei Yokoi. And some of us even recognize that it's red and gold, which is a little nod to the original Nintendo Famicom color scheme. All of this to say, we take great pleasure in these references, in part because we like to feel like smart cookies, but also because it helps build our identity and build a community. So if you're wearing this shirt and I come up to you and I say, hey, cool Shigeru Miyamoto shirt, you know that I know the reference, and we have like a little moment, right? And maybe we'll start talking about video games. So we enjoy these references. We really enjoy when they're somewhat obscure, and that's what makes them kind of special. And I think this is definitely true when it comes to video games and retro games. Not to be confused with retro studios. I know the venue, not retro studios, love you guys. Retro games, okay. So this is a screenshot from Shovel Knight, which maybe I'm seeing some nods, awesome, okay, it just came out recently. And people are really excited about this game. Part of what's pleasurable about this game is that we get the reference, right? It's low color, it's pixelated, and we get the reference. This is a reference to the NES, and of course the developers tried very hard to match the spec of the original NES in creating this game. And as someone who programs for the NES, I take great pleasure from a technical perspective looking at this game and saying, okay, well, how many sprites per scan line are there, right? I'm like, it's a sort of like nerdy calculus that's going on while I'm watching gameplay. But just the experience of having played the NES as a kid or something like that may give you some kind of emotional reference that makes you excited about this game. Now, what's interesting in my case is that I didn't have an NES when I was a kid. And in fact, I didn't play Mega Man, I didn't play any of these sort of classics, Metroid, Zelda, blah, 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 blah. I didn't play any of those. And in fact, I was kind of discouraged from playing video games as a kid. So in some sense, I don't have an emotional bond that's necessary for me to get the full sort of pleasure out of a game like this. So as an NES developer, I thought about what games would I get pleasure out of? And this is a game I made last year called Electronic Sweet and Fun Fortune Teller. I wanted to make a game that 5-year-old me would have played on the NES when the NES was contemporary. And I was big into Barbie and My Little Pony and cute girly girl stuff, and so I wrote this game. You put in your name and your birthday and a few personal details, and you get a horoscope, which may or may not make sense. It's kind of semi-randomly generated. And what I thought was really interesting about this game when I released it is, some people really enjoyed it, thought it was funny. A few of the game sites reviewed it, and they were a little confounded. And they said, this is such a weird, obscure reference. There are these old Japanese Famicom fortune-telling games, and nobody's played them, especially in the US. Why would she make such an obscure reference to such an obscure corner of gaming? And I thought, this is great because as reviewers, your great knowledge of the NES and Famicom has functioned as a blindness, in my view, because what was I referencing? Of course, the magazines that I read as a girl that have love horoscopes and compatibility tests, as well as electronic diaries and organizers like this one made by Tiger. These almost invariably had some sort of horoscope function. And so, all of this is to say, if you don't get the reference, or you don't have an emotional connection to it, or you don't care about the reference, you're not going to get all of that pleasure. And I found this was the case with the reviewers. They weren't really getting why this game was fun, and some of us were kind of snickering, and we knew why it was fun. But this is actually pretty important when it comes to thinking about your audience for something like a retro game, the use of pixel art. Think about who's going to get pleasure out of that aesthetic. Especially I think given the contemporary interest in diversifying gaming and gamers, that's especially critical. Because if you ask me when I was 10 years old to talk about gaming in the 90s, I would be talking about this, right? This is what I think of as retro gaming. Because these are my references that I'm pulling from. And I want to take this opportunity to say, this really is not about reinscribing gender stereotypes. I happen to grow up as a very girly girl, and that's kind of what I take pleasure in. But I'm definitely not trying to say let's do gender stereotypes in all of our games. But rather just to say, not all of us are coming to this table with the same background, and we're not all coming to the table with the same idea of what a classic is. And I think, in the case of retro games, you see so many references to the NES. You see so many references to Super Mario Brothers, Legend of Zelda, all these sort of classic games, and I think it's important for us to keep in mind that these aren't classics for everyone. So just to kind of wrap up, I want smart games that reference my classics. And I think as a game developer, the onus is on me to create those games. And I think for those of you who are involved in game development, the onus is on you to really look back at your own experiences, your memories, and incorporate those and let those inform. Don't feel like you have to make another Mega Man clone just because that's what retro gaming is. Definitely broaden those things that you're pulling from. As a historian, I feel that I'm charged with collecting and sort of reinterpreting my classics for other people, so that they can borrow and steal from what's already come. I want to see someone remake, teen dating games from the 90s, and these things that are maybe a little more obscure. And that's why I have done this work with Famicom, and I find it so rewarding, is that people are going back and visiting some of these games that aren't sort of canonical. And finally, as an educator, I hope to show my students, and hopefully I've helped show you guys, that your classics matter. They're important, and we should definitely be combing through those and letting those inform our work. So that's why my mantra is no bad memories. You can steal this. I actually stole it from a floppy disk company advertisement in the 80s. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you get in touch. You can find me at nobadmemories.com or some of these things on the interwebs. Thank you so much.